Every day, you hear names like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos. But some of the most powerful people in America never stand in front of a camera. They don't tweet. They don't run for office. Yet their money can shift laws, fund wars, and reshape entire industries. Take this in for a second. One family's private network has spent more on politics than most nations spend on education. And some defense billionaires make more profit from a single year of war than a city makes in a decade of peace. But here's the catch. Most Americans don't even know their names. These aren't movie villains or comic book tycoons. They're real families, deeply American, deeply strategic, who built their empires quietly behind closed doors. In this story, you'll see how the Koch family became one of the most influential dynasties in U.S. history. You'll discover how America's defense billionaires silently fuel the machine that keeps the nation at the top of the world order. And you'll learn why their combined power may shape your future more than any president ever could. But the truth behind their rise will shock you. Because once you see who really pulls the strings of America's wealth and influence, you'll never look at power the same way again. Let me show you exactly how this happened. To understand America's hidden power, we need to look beyond the White House. Real influence often lives in the shadows, in boardrooms, think tanks, and private estates far from public view. Take the Koch family. For decades, they've been called the most powerful family you've never heard of. Their fortune began with oil, but it didn't stop there. Fred Koch, the family's founder, made his first millions building oil refineries back in the 1930s. He worked with companies across the globe, even in the Soviet Union, long before his sons, Charles and David Koch, took over. When they did, they transformed a small refinery business into Koch Industries, one of the largest private companies in the world. How big? Bigger than McDonald's, Goldman Sachs, and even Boeing combined. Yet the Kochs rarely appear on Forbes covers. They prefer quiet control. Their empire stretches from pipelines to paper towels, fertilizers to finance. And their influence reaches deep into American politics, but not in the way you might think. Instead of running for office, they built an invisible network. Think of it like a shadow infrastructure of power. Think tanks, nonprofits, political groups, all connected through quiet funding. They don't shout, they whisper, and Washington listens. Sources suggest the Koch network has poured billions into shaping U.S. policies, not just for business, but for ideology. They call it freedom. Critics call it control. And while they dominate the economic front, another group of billionaires operates behind America's military curtain. Defense moguls. The people who profit every time a new weapon is built or a war begins. Together, these two forces, industrial wealth and defense power, quietly shape the backbone of American dominance. Most of us never see it, but it touches everything, from the price of fuel to the technology in your pocket. Now here's where things get really interesting, because the next part reveals how these billionaire networks build an empire that influences not just politics, but the very system America runs on. This doesn't look like the center of American power. No skyscrapers, no flashing lights. But from a plain office building in Wichita, the Koch family runs one of the most powerful private empires in the world. Here's the first big secret. Because Koch Industries is privately owned, it doesn't have to tell the public anything. No stockholders, no quarterly reports. That means billions of dollars move through the system quietly, with almost no eyes watching. Koch Industries reportedly makes over $125 billion in yearly revenue. That's more than Nike, Goldman Sachs, and Starbucks combined. You won't find detailed records of where all that money flows. But money alone isn't power. Influence is. And this is where the Kochs played the long game. Starting in the 1970s, Charles Koch began funding what many call a parallel political universe. Instead of trying to win elections, he built a machine that shapes the people who win them. He poured money into think tanks like the Cato Institute and the Heritage Foundation, places that craft the ideas politicians use in speeches and laws. He backed universities, student programs, and activist groups. Piece by piece, he built an intellectual army that spread one message: less government, more freedom. But wait, Freedom isn't free, it's expensive. Reports suggest that over the past few decades, the Koch network and its partners have spent billions influencing public policy, climate debates, and even judicial appointments. Imagine this. You turn on the news. You hear a senator argue for lower taxes or fewer regulations. What you don't see are the decades of behind-the-scenes funding that help shape that opinion. This isn't illegal. It's strategy. While most billionaires fight for visibility, the Kochs built durability, influence that lasts for generations. Their empire doesn't just sell products, it sells ideas. Ideas that have reshaped how Americans think about business, government, and even freedom itself. But if you think that's where their power ends, you're wrong. Because while the Kochs were busy influencing policy and ideology, another set of billionaires found their own way to steer America's future, not through politics, but through defense. And this next part will make you see America's military machine in a whole new light. But if you think that's crazy, wait until you hear this. Every year, the U.S. government spends more on defense than the next 10 countries combined. Over $850 billion every single year. But here's the real question. Where does all that money go? Most people imagine soldiers, bases, or national security. But a huge slice flows into private hands, to defense billionaires who make fortunes from building weapons, aircraft, and surveillance systems. Meet the hidden giants. Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, General Dynamics. Each name sounds like a corporation, but behind them stand powerful investors and billionaires who quietly shape the business of war. The defense industry isn't just about protecting America. It's also about profiting from protection. Every missile launched, every jet built, every global tension means contracts worth billions. And when global conflict rises, so do their stock prices. Take Lockheed Martin, for example. When global tension spiked, their revenue soared to over $67 billion. One of their most famous creations, the F-35 jet, cost nearly $80 million each, and the U.S. plans to buy more than 2,400 of them. That's almost $190 billion in total. Now, imagine the influence of the people behind that. Executives, shareholders, and families whose wealth grows when the world feels unsafe. According to reports, former defense officials often move into corporate boardrooms, and corporate leaders move into government. It's called the revolving door. One year you write defense policy. Next year, you profit from it. Even some tech billionaires have joined this quiet club. Companies like Palantir, reportedly backed by early Silicon Valley investors, now build data tools used by the CIA and Pentagon. Lines blur between technology, defense, and surveillance. And this blending of industries means one thing: influence that never sleeps. Because when billionaires and defense officials share goals, budgets grow. And as budgets grow, so does power. Not just military power, but political power too. Yet, here's what most Americans never realize. You help fund it. Every paycheck, every tax dollar, every vote for national security, a fraction goes toward the engine that keeps the machine turning. In public, we celebrate peace. But in private, a small group benefits when tension rises. Still, before we rush to judgment, remember, these billionaires also fuel innovation. Their investments lead to new technologies, GPS, the internet, and even medical breakthroughs started as defense projects. So, is this system dark or brilliant? Dangerous or necessary? That depends on who's asking and who's profiting. But either way, one truth stands firm. America's hidden billionaires, from oil to defense, have built a system so powerful it operates beyond politics. And that system is about to reveal its biggest secret yet. Because this brings us to the most shocking discovery of all, the moment where ideology, money, and power finally collide. This is where the worlds of money and power quietly meet. Oil and defense, industry and ideology, and the bridge between them, influence. For decades, the Koch network shaped American politics from the outside. Meanwhile, defense billionaires shaped America's strength from within. But around the 2000s, something new began to form. a fusion of business interests that cross party lines, industries, and even national borders. The same money that pushed for limited government also funded research supporting strong national defense. It sounds like a contradiction, but in practice, it built a balance that kept America both free and feared. Behind closed doors, think tanks funded by private wealth began hosting defense roundtables. Oil executives shared rooms with generals. Tech founders discussed security innovation alongside political strategists. Different motives, same result: the creation of an unseen alliance between ideology and industry. According to public filings and investigative reports, Koch-linked groups have occasionally supported policies that expand defense capabilities, especially when they intersect with energy security. And defense billionaires, in turn, have funded policy research that aligns with free market principles. A loop of mutual benefit. The Kochs push deregulation and energy independence, more oil and infrastructure. Defense contractors secure government contracts to protect those assets. The government leans on private industries for both innovation and support. It's a triangle of power that feeds itself. And it's not a conspiracy, it's a strategy. Every side wins. The government gets global dominance. Corporations get profit. And billionaires get influence that money alone could never buy. This system has even reached into American education. Through scholarships, research grants, and university programs, students are subtly taught certain economic and political philosophies. Many later become lawmakers, analysts, or advisors, carrying those same ideas into Washington. It's a quiet pipeline, one that starts in classrooms and ends in Congress. But here's the most shocking part. This hidden web isn't directed by any single person or group. It runs on momentum, a self-sustaining ecosystem of money, belief, and opportunity. Once it started, it no longer needed control. It just needed fuel. And that fuel is you, the taxpayer, the consumer, the voter. Every time you buy, vote, or click, a small ripple moves through the system, powering the invisible machine. So when you see headlines about defense, spending, or energy policy, remember, you're not just watching politics. You're watching a decades-long strategy unfold. So what does all this mean for us today? What does this hidden empire mean for the average American, for your wallet, your future, and your freedom? Let's break that down next. So what does all this mean for us, the everyday people living beneath the shadow of billion-dollar power? Here's the truth. The Koch family and defense billionaires aren't cartoon villains. They're builders of systems that run deep through the veins of America's economy, government, and even culture. But those systems come with trade-offs, and they affect you more than you might think. Let's start with the economy. When billionaires shape markets, it changes what products cost, what jobs exist, and even what kind of future gets built. Koch Industries touches almost every part of daily life, from the fuel in your car to the materials in your home. Defense spending shapes where tax dollars go, sometimes toward missiles, instead of medicine or education. Even peace has a price. When conflicts end, defense budgets often stay high. When oil prices fall, subsidies rise. And through it all, the same circle of influence quietly grows stronger. But here's where it gets interesting. These same systems also drive innovation. The defense sector helped give us GPS, the internet, and countless technologies that power modern life. Energy giants invest in clean tech and new fuels. So the machine that seems cold or corporate also helps build the very progress we rely on. That's the paradox of American power. The same hidden system that concentrates influence also creates opportunity. According to economists, the top 1% of Americans now control over 30% of the nation's wealth. That gap widens each year. And yet, most of that wealth flows through just a few families, companies, and industries that built their fortunes decades ago. So when people talk about the American dream, it's still alive, just hidden behind layers of structure and legacy wealth. The real question isn't whether the dream exists. It's who owns it now. But there's another side to this story: inspiration. Because if these billionaires built networks of power through patience, education, and strategy, and so can we. The Kochs didn't build an empire overnight. It took generations, ideas, investments, and consistency. They didn't just make money. They built systems that make money for them. And that's a lesson every American can learn from, not in scale, but in mindset. You don't need billions to build influence. You need purpose, persistence, and a plan. Because while the powerful shape America from the top down, ordinary people can still shape it from the ground up. But before we wrap up, there's one final thing you need to know, a twist that changes how you'll see power in America forever. We began this story with a mystery, the billionaires behind America's hidden power. Now you know their names. You've seen their influence. But the real secret isn't about them. It's about the system they helped create, a system so efficient, it no longer needs them to survive. Even if the Kochs vanished tomorrow, even if every defense billionaire retired, the machine would keep running. Because power, once built, has momentum. It lives in institutions, laws, habits, and minds. It's like a river. Even when its creators step aside, the current keeps flowing. And maybe that's the most incredible part. America's true strength isn't just in its billionaires, corporations, or politicians. It's in the systems of belief that make people chase freedom, innovation, and success, even when they disagree on what those words mean. The Koch family called it economic freedom. Defense leaders called it security. Different languages, same story, both chasing power through purpose. But here's the final twist. For all their wealth and reach, even the most powerful billionaires are bound by the same rule as everyone else. If this story opened your eyes, then what comes next will open your mind. Because the next time you hear the word power, you'll know it's not just about money. It's about the people who know how to use it. And that brings us to the end, but also to a beginning. We've just traveled through decades of quiet power, from oil fields to boardrooms, from think tanks to the Pentagon. You've seen how influence doesn't always wear a suit or stand behind a podium. Sometimes it hides in plain sight. Let's recap the 3 biggest takeaways. First, real power often moves in silence. The Koch family didn't chase fame. They built systems, foundations, research hubs, and political networks that lasted longer than any campaign or headline. They proved that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in direction. Second, defense billionaires turned global tension into a business model. They built the engines that protect and profit from power. And through them, America became not just a country, but a force that sets the rules of global security. Third, the real empire is invisible. It's the network of money, ideas, and influence that keeps the machine running long after its founders are gone. But here's the part most people miss. You don't have to be a billionaire to understand or even use the same principles. Every movement, big or small, starts with 3 things: an idea, a plan, and persistence. That's how the Kochs did it. That's how America's hidden billionaires turned their beliefs into real power. So, if you take one lesson from this story, let it be this. Power doesn't just belong to the rich. It belongs to those who think long-term, act consistently, and understand how systems work. You can use that same mindset in your own life, in business, in creativity, or in your community. Build something that lasts. Because real influence isn't bought. It's built brick by brick, decision by decision. Maybe the secret billionaires didn't just shape America's future. Maybe they were showing the rest of us how it's done. If this story opened your eyes, imagine what else is waiting beneath the surface. Because this was only one chapter of America's hidden power. There are others: tech dynasties, digital empires, secret fortunes that control the modern world. And each of them hides a truth you're not supposed to see. If you want to uncover the next secret power story, hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. Because in our next episode, we'll reveal the untold story of how America's tech billionaires are quietly building digital kingdoms and what it means for your freedom. If power could be built quietly, like the Kochs did, what would you build? Drop your answer in the comments. Your idea might inspire the next generation of thinkers, builders, and dreamers.